Welcome to Australian Hunger. I'm your host, Ben. On today's show, I've got an interview with Canadian band Even the Trees. Their album, If Only Every Day Could Be Like This. Really cool story actually behind this one. So I do recommendations on some episodes for an album you might want to check out. I did one for their album because I'd heard it. Really cool combination of post-hardcore, post-rock, prog. A little bit outside my wheelhouse, and I do like to kind of recommend things that are a bit... maybe not out there, but out there for me. That's kind of something that I really want to do. And I recommend it, and somehow they found it. Really interesting because this podcast is not that big. There was no linking on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter which would have notified them that they'd been tagged. But somehow one of their friends was searching around and found the episode and had to let them know. So they put out a tweet saying, SO to Oz Hunger for their incredibly kind words about our album, If Only Every Day Could Be Like This, on his podcast. Go check out the latest episode, blah, 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 link. And that got back to me, obviously, because they tagged me. And yeah, then I thought, hang on, they're a cool band. I actually wouldn't mind talking to them. So we set up an interview, and the rest is as it goes into the interview. So really, really cool story. And it's interesting just the power of to be able to just hear someone from across the seas do something related to that, and then they'll hear about it and we just kind of get together. So really, really cool stuff. Nick and Mike from Even the Trees, their album If Only Every Day Could Be Like This. During the interview I played 3 tracks: Progress Avenue, then A Hole in the Ice Part 2, and at the end, Tonight We Don't Think We Do. This is Even the Trees. So just for people, just so they can differentiate you guys, could you just introduce yourselves, maybe say something briefly about you and what you do in the band?
All right, my name's Nick. I play guitar and compose a bulk of the music in the band for the time being. And other than that, my passions include collecting vinyl and CDs, and I work as a AV tech otherwise.
And I'm Mike. I yell at people. I'm the vocals on the album, vocals for the band. I took up a lot of the lyric and vocal writing. And outside of the band, I do a solo project. I got a side band, and I teach.
So where did the band start?
So this is basically my baby from like way back. I think we traced it back formally to about 2005 of me kind of formally like releasing a debut effort of like an instrumental kind of demo. Basically way back when, since I started like playing guitar, I always was more drawn to songwriting and melody. And even with a dollar store microphone, I was always demoing songs as a kid on like not even a DAW, just like a Windows sound recorder. So then fast forward a couple years, I got introduced to like Guitar Pro software for tabbing my songs and more like DAWs such as Adobe Audition and onto like Cubase and Pro Tools and stuff like that. And so I was always just kind of trying to hone my own style and like just write songs at the same time as like discovering new music and like learning those songs and analyzing how they write those songs. And basically ever since 2005 is when I tried to get a lineup together. Tons of drummers, tons of second guitar players, tons of bass players, kind of revolving door of members, but never a vocalist that stuck around. And then around
and then I ruined it.
Then around like 2012, 13ish, I had like a lineup for like 3-4 years that was the most consistent, and then everyone quit one at a time, and I basically I was left back to like square one. Like I was like, do I try to reform this band again, or do I just kind of quit? And I was almost on the verge of just selling my gear and going to do something totally different, like interior design or something. I'd call it, like a university here, like something totally random. I was pretty beat up about it, but then discovered some new bands that kind of reignited my love for music and decided to do audio production. And then through that program, I mutually met Mike on vocals, and then our drummer. We worked at the same store together, but we're both like into AV. And our bass player, Chris, he actually originally was asked to play drums for the project. I found him on YouTube back when he lived in Sudbury, which is about many hours north of here in Toronto, in Ontario. And he moved to Toronto, or Mississauga rather, to go to school for audio productions, which is when we started jamming. And basically finding everyone on a lot more mutual terms was a lot better than kind of like Craigslist ads before, or just desperately trying to like just find members and auditioning people like that.
It was nice to be friends first.
Friends first, and then kind of jamming after that. And the moral is kind of like you really kind of persevere through patience and just like really finding the right people, because there's a lot of people I found that are good but had some vices or some certain things in their personal lives or things that I knew would be obstacles in a band. So rather than knowing the process of like how much of a headache that can be, I just kind of steered away from it right away. So it took a long time to get here, but in hindsight, every bit of it was worth it. So sorry, that was a little long-winded, but there is a bit of a history there.
How exactly do you kind of go about, I don't know, like... No, I'm not going anywhere with that question. We'll move on to the next one.
I think I know what you're trying to ask.
I feel like I know where you're going, too.
If you want to finish the question for me.
Yeah, Mike, try it.
Like, how do you come up with a band when it seems like there's so many factors, right? Like, there's so much that almost counts against you. So many things to consider when you're bringing a group of people together to do something creative. Is that kind of where you were going with it?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, I think that the band works really well because all of us have come from a lot of different projects. This is not like a first band for everybody. And going through a lot of different projects has shown us what works and what doesn't, especially in terms of like the kind of content we wanted to create. It seems like Even the Trees ended up being a project that pushed all of us. And it was, I guess, an outlet to do something bigger or more experimental or more like mature. Whereas in other bands, that doesn't mean that the stuff we did before wasn't mature, but it was, I don't know. It seems like this band happened because four people were in the right headspace at the same time.
And yeah, well said. And like in my mind, I definitely have a bit of a checklist of prerequisites I like want out of people. And back when I asked Mikey to like try out for vocals, he was actually rather shy about it. He's like, "No, I don't have the chops for it, man." He was just like, "I'm flattered, but like, no." And I just remember I kept like, I was like just bombarding with texts like weekly, just being like, "Nah, man, try it, let's do it." Then I eventually got him over. We did like a vocal demo and like he screamed in my closet, and like I think we did Whole Nice Part 1 initially or something like that.
Yeah, because it was short, it was quick, it was like
it was short and quick, and then I'm like, "Yo, see, it's fucking sick," and like it was virtually the same thing that ended up on the album, like just a little more polished up now with the little background oohs and ahs and everything. But like I told him on the spot, I'm like, "See," like I showed him like other demos people tried to do over that song, and I'm like, none of these quite like hit the mark, and like you like there's something here. And same thing with like drums and stuff. I had other drummers that like I'm still friends with, but maybe like some of the material got to be a little challenging, and like I always want to write a little more ambitious kind of like patterns or like polyrhythms and this and that. And like they eventually got to be able to play it, but with Mike, our current drummer, I remember the first time we jammed, he played Meshuggah's Bleed while he was like warming up. And I just looked at our guitar player at the time, and I'm like, "Yo, he's in." Because if he can play that, like, because a lot of the patterns like kick heavy and stuff, I'm like, if he can play that, this guy can do anything. And then like I showed him the rest of the songs, he's like, cool. And like next practice, I was like, try to learn one or two of them, and he came and he knew like 5 songs, and I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a walk in the park, and it has been. And to be quite frank, like I can't wait to see what future material sounds like with him writing his own drum parts like entirely. Because for this release, I had drum ideas like already kind of predetermined, which would always like kind of already coexist. So it always like kind of be in the way of like anyone's creative process because it already kind of makes sense to exist there and kind of influence their decisions. But if I gave him just a blank slate, I can't wait to see what like he would do with it.
Where did the name for the band come from?
Oh, this one's a funny quick story. I kind of like to preset it by saying there was an old instrumental EP when it was still under the moniker Even the Trees. I on purpose released it on April 20th because everyone thinks Even the Trees that it's like a weed reference, and then like I was okay, I'll release it on 420, it'll be hilarious, and that kind of like provoked that more. But the one funny little fact is like I've never smoked weed personally, and people are always like shocked by that, and especially with the name and everything. But the actual name comes from an American comedy. Maybe you've seen it, Clerks 2. Does that name sound familiar?
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I can't say I've seen it though, unfortunately.
Okay, I highly recommend it. It's one of those just straight up like dialogue comedies. And so the 2 main characters at a fast food restaurant, and I think his buddy is like working behind the counter, and they're discussing movies. And it initially started about the whole like Star Wars, Star Trek debate, and then it moved on to Lord of the Rings. And this guy's saying like, "Oh man, Lord of the Rings is the most boring movie in existence. Here, let me reenact all the movies." And like on the spot, he's just kind of like slowly walking across the restaurant, being like, "Here's part 1." He takes like 3 steps. Here's part 2. He takes a couple steps, trips a little bit, and then he looks behind them and takes a couple more steps. And then part 3, he's like, he walks to an edge, takes the ring off his finger, throws it down a cliff, shrugs, and walks away. And he's like, "That movie was so fucking boring, even the trees fucking walked in it." And I'm like, oh, that's kind of a funny name. Like, kind of like I was laughing. I'm like, and originally the name was going to be Even the Trees Walked. But then I felt like that kind of almost pigeonholed it to sounding more of like a sludge or like metal band kind of name. Which is actually kind of cool to think of it now in hindsight. Like, it should be like our...
It sounds pretty heavy.
Yeah, like... We should just do an EP that's like really heavy stuff and just call it that. But I just kind of went with the good old like blank the blank kind of name formula, easy to remember, and just Even the Trees. And yeah, so it's just kind of a quote off of a movie. No disrespect towards any of those movies, obviously. They're all great, I imagine. But it was just a really funny scene.
When did you the material for this album start to come forth? Because as you mentioned, this project has been a long time coming. Like when did this kind of something that resembles the album start to be created?
This answer is a little embarrassing. Bulk of it's around 2008 or 2009. So it's been quite a bit of time.
But it's matured so much. We were digging up some old demos, just after the album release, and it's crazy how different some things are.
Yeah, the oldest song on the record is technically track 5, Outlines. I think I sent the guys a demo that predated to like 2003 for that one. And it was like 80% the same parts. But otherwise, there's so much like reimagining or restructuring, and especially with the vocals coming into play. Some songs like Here Comes the Walking Fire is like a combination of a bunch of new parts or riffs from old songs like put into a whole different key. It was some ideas I had like written for like some 7-string material that I altered back to being on 6-string, and kind of put that all together. But the newer material songs on the album are songs like Progress Avenue, track 10 Tonight We Don't Think We Do, and the final track are I think are the newest that kind of predate in like the last 4 or 5 years or so.
And how did you, like, what is your process for writing music, and has it kind of changed over the years?
Funny enough, like when I discovered Periphery and Misha's like writing process, I was like, holy crap, this guy's doing the exact same thing I do, but he's making totally different music. But we both kind of go under the same kind of progressive moniker of like, they call themselves progressive, but they're a metal band, but people will still argue that. But their mentality of progressive is like they just write what they want to hear and like make music that they're personally fans of. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to follow a verse, chorus, bridge, chorus kind of song structure. They just want to write the parts that inspire them, or like maybe focus a song around like a riff or just like a little cool concept or something. So that being said, like when I discovered kind of like Guitar Pro and like software drums and everything, I was like, okay, I can kind of be like a one-man band and kind of get like really good pictures drawn of like these song ideas that can like really draw people into maybe like work with me and stuff. And honestly, a bulk of the initial ideas would start on acoustic guitar super late at night, and there's like tons of videos on my phone that I'm still going through now for like new material that are just like, it'll either start with like a full 2-minute thing or maybe just a 10-second clip that just inspires a full thing. But I never force it. I'm never going to sit down and be like, cool, today I have to write to this riff and like try finish it. It just kind of, it'll just happen. Like some songs would just come out in a couple hours. I remember when Progress Avenue came about, I think I mostly wrote it on Guitar Pro initially, then demoed it quickly after that. But I remember I was up for maybe like 22 hours straight, like just on my computer, like stepping out every couple hours to get like coffee and some food or something, but just being so hyped on it because I was really that song. It's easy to listen to, but there's a lot of technical underlying to it. So yeah, that song was a lot of fun. But in general, I just try not to overthink. I like write it apart while it's still inspiring. But if it's ever like I feel like I'm just like dragging my feet or like really trying to just kind of force this part to make sense, then I know it's not gonna work to my liking. Or if I kind of get to that point, I would just kind of spit out stupid ideas and be like, okay, I like these parts. I know this part I'm probably not gonna like. I'll sleep on it. I'll see what I think about it a week later. Chances are it gets scrapped. Or there's some parts that like when we were restructuring Walking Fire, there was a couple breakdowns. I remember I wanted to add in the songs. And the rest of the guys, and like primarily Chris, is kind of like a gatekeeper of like what riffs are gonna pass or not. And I was like, I really like this riff in the song, and he's just like, nah, like I like the part, but it's too much. Like it's not, it doesn't add to the song. But I'm
he
like,
keeps
but
us
I like
grounded.
it. You kind of get really kind of keeps that like non biased kind of opinion, just like really being the most objective and being like, trust me, like it's a good part. Keep it on the back burner, not for this song. And then I'll like bite my tongue and be like, okay, I'll take it out. And then like now I listen back to a demo that had that part and I'm like, fuck, he's right. Like it did drag on. So like it kind of helps to really have, especially nowadays, like these guys around me to help keep my like kind of creativity to like not be overwhelming.
Yeah, we kind of work together to focus things. It's not like we ever try to inhibit any creativity, but when we feel like something's going to really push something forward, we're like, yeah, keep doing that. Or if we feel like something's like way too wacky, it's like, okay, maybe we could save that for something else.
And another thing that like this, like I've told this to some people that are other like songwriters, or like when I've had bands stay over my place and just try to talk about songwriting. Not too many people do this, but like for the sad parts in the album or like the much more moodier parts, like I literally would turn off all the lights in the studio room or just put up like a red light or anything and just like get in the worst headspace. Even though if I'm writing instrumentals, like I I try to tell a story, like, because I can't write lyrics, so I try to tell a story through the music and the moods that I'm trying to like portray, or just like I kind of look at the songs like a bit of a play. And like I said, I would literally, there's that whole joke of like when you try to go to sleep and like you reenact all the last 10 years of embarrassing moments, and you can't like turn your brain off or something. I would literally just be like, hey, remember how you made an ass of yourself in that situation, or this and that. Just try to like kind of whatever the song's kind of about, and just try to really get in that mindset. And that kind of would inspire like those gloomy sounds, or just atmospheres, or I guess like structured choices in the song to like, if the song is going sad, to not take a right turn and like become a happy song all of a sudden. Just be like, no, let's just go into the deep end, and like there's no happy ending. Like it's not a fucking Hollywood movie or something, it's gonna be real. And that's kind of a thing that I feel like really translated with the album. That the feedback we got is that people kind of got that like it's a very passionate album, like kind of tries to really convey like some real emotion and stuff. So
yeah. And one fun fact is that whenever we recorded a lot of that album, you'll notice there's a lot of really washy, pretty spacey ambient stuff, a lot of post-rock inspired stuff, and a lot of that stuff ended up happening without a lot of the band around. Nick tended to get into his space that he was talking about and do that without us. So it was always really cool to sit down after, I don't know, a couple of nights of not hearing about the songs, and then he'd be like, hey guys, I finished this part, and it's just like, whoa. So somehow you've made this like Dolby 7.1 surround sound wash of tones. Like, where did this come from?
And I guess another quick example is the very end of the album, part 3, that 3-minute like instrumental bit, that little reprise at the end was always in the initial demo, that little happy kind of sounding bit, but I felt like it would come in too soon after that final chord. So I always wanted to write something around it. And earlier this summer, I kind of mentioned it earlier, we moved as a family for the first time, and we were moving away from like the house I grew up in for like 24 years. And that's where I had like this little studio set up and stuff. And that was the last thing I recorded in that space, like while the room was half packed up and everything. So like I said, getting in like that weird, sad kind of mindset. So it was really kind of flagship song for like saying goodbye to the house he grew up in. So that's why after that final chord, it's kind of really that desolate, sad, hanging chord where you're kind of just like overwhelmed with memories and everything. And then it kind of flows through like just kind of fast forwarding through like all your ups and downs of growing up in a place. And so like it's a lot of stuff that's easy to listen to and be like, oh, this all sounds cool, but like it really, every note or like every bit on the album is like intentional, I guess, is my overall point.
Mike, with the vocals, to what extent were they kind of the ideas already sort of laid down, and to what extent did you kind of bring new ideas to the album?
Honestly, there was only one pre-existing demo that I really, really liked. Chad, I think was the name. Yes, Chad, right, Nick? Chad?
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the various members that Nick had gone shopping for online had written a really, really cool demo for Second Chances. And of all the other demos that I had heard, that was the one that I kind of latched onto the most. But otherwise, when I joined into the band, the album was a clean slate for me, and that was really cool, but also kind of intimidating. Like Nick was saying, it took me a while to actually feel confident in writing anything on the album, because I was like, wow, this has so much more depth than anything I've ever written before or anything I've ever been involved in. And it was a bit of a challenge that I was really, really happy to be taking on. And like Nick had mentioned, a lot of his riffs and a lot of his writing style tends to do a really good job of telling a story without vocals on top of it. So one of the big things I had to work with and work to overcome was making sure that I didn't like bury those ideas make sure that I complemented those ideas. And it was, I don't know, it was just a really cool process. There were songs that, let me think, songs like Tonight We Don't Think We Do, which felt really melodramatic and heavy and brooding. And when I initially heard it, I was picturing such a different song than what we ended up with in the end. And a lot of that came from, I guess, my tendency to sort of write from a poppy R&B sort of place, where I was like, oh, okay, we could actually take this crazy time signature and turn it into something that's palatable for people, because it had so many twists and turns, and I was like, this is amazing, but like for the casual listener, this is so rough to listen to because it just goes all over the place. So that was a song I had a lot of fun like molding, I guess, in a way, with vocals. Whereas some other ones I had never written as heavy as I did on this album. And it was really cool to spend the writing process improving my screams. In the studio, I learned where my low scream finally sat properly. And I was like, yes, okay, good. Let's take this and do something with it. And yeah, so that was it in terms of like vocals. But lyrically, Nick had done a really good job of naming all these songs. I found he had, like, a lot of the titles on the album existed before I showed up. And
funny enough, I was like, go ahead and change them, and like none of them ended up changing.
Yeah, I didn't want to. They almost served as like a thesis almost, or like something about them always drew me towards a topic or towards some sort of way of expressing what I was feeling writing the songs. And so it was like I had actually written a big doc that I sent to the guys while I was working abroad that sort of outlined some of my thought process. But things like the Hole in the Ice trilogy, as soon as I read that, I was picturing literally a hole in the ice, but it kind of became like this metaphor of like when you look out on a frozen lake and you see like this perfect, serene, not a single flaw in this lake, but suddenly you notice this little spot, this little imperfection, this little hole. And the more you pay attention to it, the more it kind of ruins that perfection. It ruins what you got in front of you. And the more you pay attention to it, the more it bugs you, the more it kind of irritates you. And the trilogy itself kind of became a trilogy about kind of seeing that in yourself, seeing that in the relationships you have, seeing that in your life in general. When you start to nitpick and drive yourself crazy and focus too hard on something instead of enjoying something for what it is. And just that metaphor itself fueled so much in all three of those songs. And I think it helped me to develop a lot as a writer, as a lyricist, as a composer, to have something meaningful to write rather than just kind of boopity-doop boop and then filling it in later with some rhymes that made sense.
And I can't see much in the future. My eyes are weak, and I can't see ahead. We're just canvassing for answers. me. Vacant faces, staring at vacant spaces. We can't escape. My eyes are weak, and I can't see it. Just get rushed for answer. Can we find meaning when we always look without seeing? Could you show me the way? It's all I've ever known. Could you show me the way? Could you lead me astray? Could you show me the way? Could you lead me
I understand this might not be the way you actually kind of... It sort of happens in the band, but like let's take a hypothetical process. Nick comes to you with saying like, all right, this is going to be on the album. Here's a song. Let's write vocals and lyrics to it. How do you approach that?
Well, lots of listens, especially with our instrumentals. There's a lot going on. That's kind of where we started off with Progress Avenue. He had introduced that to me when we were working together on some recordings for my band. We had met up in the studio because he was finishing his engineering program, and I needed he needed us to finish his final project where he was making an EPK for our band.
Subject.
And so he had presented Progress Avenue to me like one night at like 3 a.m. when we were grinding away on my band stuff, and I was like, Nick, what the hell is this? Like, how did you, like, where did you come up with these polyrhythms? Like, what are you doing here? And it was like a couple of nights of analysis. I sat on it for a long time, and eventually I was coming up with little parts here and there. But again, I needed a latching point. A lot of what happens with me when I write is I need something to make me feel like I'm actually writing for a purpose. I'm not usually, at least now anyway, I'm not usually just writing for the sake of writing. I'm writing to tell a story, or I'm writing to make a statement, or I'm writing to get some sort of an emotion out. So that's usually where I start, is like, where is my latching point, or what is the purpose I'm going for with the song? And then that usually follows with like lots and lots of tangential thinking, whether that's getting onto YouTube and watching a bunch of videos related to that feeling or that topic or that place. A lot of this album kind of came from dealing with, especially the Whole and Nice trilogy, especially songs like Hollowed Out, Outlines, Here Comes a Walking Fire. There's lots of songs that were dealing with, I guess, my mental and emotional state at the time. So a lot of it was venting too. So a lot of it was like therapeutic, I guess. Finding that latching point and then thinking, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with this thing that's currently bothering me right now. How can I get rid of this? Or, this has really been tough on me. My career's not going anywhere. How am I going to talk about my career without sounding like a hokey loser? How am I going to make something that's relatable? How am I going to make something that's like raw? How am I going to make something that actually captures how hard this is? And yeah, so latching point is usually where I start. And then I just write. I write like crazy. I throw down 4 or 5 different versions of a song. It's never usually melodies that give me a hard time. It's usually content, and then I usually end up in Nick's closet yelling at a microphone for a while and hoping that it sounds right. And then things will go through iterations. There were some songs that worked right away, some songs that took like 5 or 6 drafts, sitting on them, having a eureka moment in the shower or while I'm on the toilet or something, and then going back to it. It's always varied. It's always different. But the one thing that always has stayed consistent is finding that that little seed, that seed that's gonna sprout something interesting.
You guys have mentioned the Hole in the Ice trilogy a few times. It's really interesting because it spreads across the entire album, beginning, middle, and end. Talk a little bit about how that particular set of songs came about.
When structuring like the whole album, it was very intentional. Because some people have asked us already, like, is the whole album a concept album? And it isn't. There is like a lot of reoccurring themes. Like Mike was just talking about for all the vocals, like a lot of it stems around going through personal growth, which is, I guess, our concept throughout the album. But then Hole in the Ice, for me musically, was kind of stemmed around kind of like my favorite chord or key. Funny enough, like back when I was learning like good old Blink-182 songs as a kid, anytime I picked up a guitar, I always just played like a B chord. That was kind of like my sound check chord. And then now we play in half step, so it's B flat, but it's still the same like spot on the neck, and that's kind of just always been my go-to. So to kind of just have some kind of like grounding on the album, like that's kind of where we always kind of sat, and kind of like that B flat key. And then I've found a little cool like minor chord that kind of stems around that song. And then just kind of discovering how much motion and like variety there is within all the modes and different kind of things you can do within that key. I was like, crap, like I'm writing a lot of riffs around this like chord progression and like kind of thing. And then I just kind of made it a fun thing to see like how much variety can I pull out of this concept. And even Hole in the Ice, like part 1, it's a short song, but there's been so many demos of figuring out that song, figuring out the tempos. It's a 2-minute song, and I think there's 3 tempo changes in that whole tempo drop at the end. But then even like the feel changes from that like dotted feel to triplets over the drums playing like non-triplet patterns and like all these little quirky things. So it's so hard to find the tempo for that song and like which lead patterns are going to work and stuff. Like there's so many like old demos and I'm like, holy crap, like why did I think that sounded good? Like thank God I moved away from that idea. Like it just clashed with the song so bad. But I knew I tried to challenge myself to be like, hey, like part 1 will be like a nice hello introduction. Part 2 will be like your regular length song. And then part 3, I knew I wanted to be like the last song on the album. And I always loved when bands had like their epic long song as the closer, like just to kind of be like, we're not done yet. Like there's still a lot left in the tank. Like I know we had your attention for like what, 30, 40, 50 minutes, but here comes the big epic closer. And there's still bands doing that now, but I felt like it kind of really had its prime time like for a little while. And I just kind of want to like bring that back and like challenge ourselves to really make that happen. And actually a bulk of that song, I have a old instrumental demo called Adventures at 4 a.m. because a lot of the song is written at 4 a.m. And that song itself was 20 minutes long that I took parts from. So, I mean, this song, the initial demo was almost, I think one of the bounces I was at 23 minutes, and I'm like, that's too much. Like, that's, like, I'm pushing. And now I'm just kind of like, just really, like, maybe I'm the only person that's going to enjoy this for 23 minutes. Like, we got to trim it down. And, so it's kind of the same thing with like a lot of the other songs. Like we try to really just cut the fat and like have the parts that service the song, and kind of how Mike said with the whole concept of like focusing on like one flaw that kind of makes your vision distorted about like a certain perfection or whatever. That whole part 3 is meant to be like a whole mental journey within like one song. So it kind of starts off determined and with like direction and kind of more poppy or like with choruses and hooks. And then it kind of goes in that little rant section again and like a little more riffy with the guitars. And then we kind of like fall off this cliff of like, you kind of lose direction. It's like, okay, where's it going to go now? And then the whole song kind of just gets sadder and sadder intentionally. Like I just made the riffs get like, let's dwell more in the minor key and much more in like chord movements that are just like, they don't resolve. Like you want that fourth chord to like give direction. It's a lot of like 3 chord progressions, different types of interchanges and feels, or like there's one part, I think it's around like the 6 or 7 minute mark. That's the, just a simple kind of chord, but the bass line in the background just kind of keeps changing rhythms and just kind of seems like everyone's kind of just like fighting and like all these like different kind of emotions are happening. And yeah, like that's whole song, like it's very intentional. It's intentional to be a whole, as if you didn't want to listen to the whole album, you can just take those 3 songs and kind of get an idea of like what you're gonna get with the album.
Yeah, we were actually toying with the idea of, because the album had taken so long, of releasing the trilogy as like its own sort of EP, and just calling it the Hole in the Ice EP. Another thing, just to add to what Nick was saying there, we kind of talked about this, and I kind of want to upload that sometime this week, so maybe I'll finally have time to do that. We sort of had a album release listening track night with a couple of friends, just a little intimate thing, and we we were lame and did kind of like an interview session with our friends and just kind of talked about it. And one thing that Nick hasn't added in here yet was just that the title itself, "If Only Every Day Could Be Like This," is really the feeling that the album tries to go for. It goes from just angry, shitty chaos, lots of inner turmoil, lots of conflicting emotions, lots of going back and forth with yourself and with the people in your life, going nuts, hating yourself. Like there's so much going on at the very beginning, and then by the end of the album, it sort of works itself towards this kind of serene acceptance. It's not happy, it's not sad, it's kind of just like, if only every day could feel this together, if only every day I could wake up feeling like things are okay, like things are right, like things are good now. And by the end of it, things are good, but then that last riff there takes you through that roller coaster of kind of like thoughts of like Nick was saying, of going over, oh shit, that was a series of mistakes I made, and you sort of like turn yourself back up, and by the end of the album it kind of brings back that riff from whole part 1, and it's kind of like the cycle is starting all over again, that cycle of rediscovering yourself, that cycle of getting back to feeling balanced, and that cycle of being normal and being happy. It's sort of a small representation of that album writing process, of what we were all going through during the process of releasing the album. And we all felt like it was a topic that a lot of people could probably, like, it would resonate with a lot of people, just that struggle to find balance, that struggle to find who you are and what makes you happy and where you can feel okay.
Yeah. Or just like when that song title was or the album title was from an old demo of mine, and I titled it when I finished that demo because I just felt so good, and I'm like, yo, if only every day can feel like this. Like, I'm on a high right now, like this song is good, I feel confident, things are making sense. So like that was the most literal sense of it, and then we kind of kept expanding on it and being like, this is pretty cool. But then I just kind of remembered
giant emo.
even the hole in the ice, like where the title came from, kind of still makes sense to what we made it into, because I kind of got the title from the original version, not the remake of "Let the Right One In," not "Let Me In."
Yeah.
Let the Right One In. Hopefully, you've seen that film. If not, it's a great. I think it was filmed somewhere in like Scandinavia, like a horror movie. And it's like one of the movements of the film, like kind of just does like a black title screen, and it introduces the next section as a hole in the ice, and the kids are playing hockey on the ice, and that's the scene where he smacks the bully with a stick on the ear, and kind of gets his revenge. But even that whole movie with that like chapter subtitle, hole in the ice, like the kid falls in love with that girl even though she's a vampire, and like has such an obvious imperfection. He still kind of sees through that and goes like, no, but I like you. But she's like, no, but I'm hideous. I'm a vampire and I'm this and that. But he's like, I don't care. So that kind of almost like with the kind of like relationships or like kind of love themes on the album, like that's kind of what a lot of like me and Mike kind of went through, of a lot of the kind of like partners we had to be with that are kind of like can't get over their own issues enough to kind of let somebody else in. Which is always a struggle, and then we feel like we're not good enough, and vice versa, and so it kind of like it ties itself all together from where the song title kind of initially came from, which is kind of interesting to kind of put together right now.
Yeah. Oh, and it was Swedish. I've got the movie on my desk
Swedish?
here right now.
You actually have the movie like box?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Bought it not long ago. It's been sitting here on my please watch me pile.
I'm caught in a place between distress and my delusions. Thought I could change your mind. I should have noticed how tightly you closed it. You thought I'd keep on fighting
mentioned the title of the album. Where does the artwork come from? Who'd you get to do that, and what was their brief?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, the artwork, we went through a couple iterations. There is a couple artist friends that I tried to meet up with and like discuss concepts, but it never really went anywhere because it was so hard to really paint a picture of like the emotion of the album is. And all my friends that I tried to meet up with, like they were all still in school or like working on their theses and stuff, and like they never really had the time to like invest and really help us out. And like no bad blood or anything, like we're all still friends. Like it was just time really never allowed itself for it to happen. And then around this time last year, I was just going through my Instagram feed, and one friend of mine, she's a professional photographer, and she kind of was on a trip across Europe and posted these pictures. And I saw what is now the album cover she posted as like just a random post, and I was like, you know, that like aha moment of like, that's the image. Like it's that cool little like bridge in the middle. The bottom of it is all like kind of like spring and summer looking, and the top is like winter on the top of the mountains. Kind of just encompasses so many elements into one simple image. And I'm a sucker for like those epic like scenic shots and everything. And initially we're just like, with the band name, like even the trees, like we shouldn't have like no trees in the album cover. We should try steer away from all those like obvious imageries. But then we saw that, I'm like, no, like it's not like it's a picture of like a tree on the cover, like it's like something super obvious like that. Like it actually does encompass like a lot of depth within one simple image. And I remember I just started a message. I'm like, hey, like your image like resonates so much with me right now. Like I feel like it's gonna be my band's like album cover. Are you cool with us using it? And she's like, oh my god, I'm flattered. Like thank you so much. Like yeah, like let's do it. And I was like, she was still on the trip in the meantime, and I'm like, hey, like, you know, I know you're gonna take pictures anyways, but like go ahead and like take a ton of pictures. And then when she got back from the trip, we met up and she showed me the whole folder picture. She's like, cool, like pick some favorites, narrow it down, see which ones you guys want to use. And I think she initially had close to like 1,500 pictures on the hard drive. I took home maybe like 430 of them, of like all breathtaking shots that are like the album cover we see now. And I was like, oh my god, I knew that one was still gonna be the cover, but I know we want to have like a booklet and like other just general artwork to have to go along with the album cycle. And I'm just like, crap, like this is going to be so hard to choose. Like literally 400 images. We narrowed it down to the 15 that we use now. And yeah, it was just kind of a nice lining up of coincidences. And like, she listens to a lot of the similar kind of like post-rock music that inspires the album. I think we made friends from like a Russian Circle show or something like way back in the day. And so that's a band that like I personally love. And kind of made sense that I know without hearing the music, she had the same kind of like inspiration and vibe behind the shots she took, which is why it kind of resonated. It wasn't the happiest scenic shots or anything. It was kind of like capturing the real mood of everything. And if I'm not mistaken, that cover image is somewhere in northern Germany, because she was in like northern Germany to some Scandinavian countries briefly, and then like Ireland and stuff, kind of that northern area of Europe. Yeah, because like even if you download like the album off Bandcamp, each track has like an individual album art.
Mm-hmm. Shameless plug. Album on
shameless
Bandcamp.
Plug, right? Yeah.
Chris did a really good job of taking those photos and turning them into really nice spreads so you could actually enjoy them for what they are.
Even if you go on the YouTube stream of the album, I think we have the PDF like, available right there.
I think we do too, yeah.
It just kind of like, we tried to pick an image that matched each thing, and some of them are just like towns, like for like Walking Fire is this like kind of clock tower looking thing, and it just had like this really copper colored like sundown, like sunset happening and stuff, and it was just so not quite like the sky on fire, but like just such a moody vibe. And I was like, damn, like, yeah. So just kind of really finding like creative people around you, and just kind of, it just works out sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of mentioned the fact that you've done a lot of the work recording the album yourself. Can you go through a bit of that, how that sort of worked out, and where you've got your sort of experience from prior to that?
Yeah. So, like I said, three of the four of us have like an engineering background. Me and the drummer Mike like still work in AV right now. Chris used to record bands and stuff after he went to school, but now he's a math genius and wants to be a professor of that. I'm not saying that sarcastic at all. Like some of the things he tells us he's studying now, we're just like,
it's wild.
Cool.
It's that theoretical kind of math. It's really weird.
But he's still very passionate about production and everything, and still could like help with like that end with us and like be really critical when it comes to like feedback about mixes and stuff. So kind of from the ground up, when we had all the demos ready to go, we kind of went unintentionally backwards, but kind of just worked out that way. Since the drums already existed in MIDI form and stuff, I tried to track the whole album on guitar before we did drums, so I can make some like, I had a lot of ideas I wanted to try in guitar and stuff, and kind of try to surprise Mike when he tracked drums and kind of like pull something out of him like when he was tracking drums. So when I tell people that, they're like, why'd you do guitar first? And it's like, because we have the drums kind of existed, so the drums are kind of done first. So we went up to Mikey's family. They have a cottage up north in Muskoka here, like 2-3 hours north. And same thing, I love the scenic like setting, and we're just like next to like a frozen lake because we did it in April where it's still kind of winter. And yeah, we spent about 8 or 9 days there. We blew a couple speaker cabinets for guitar and stuff, which set us back. There's a lot of technical issues.
That process was really crazy too. We rented out a whole bunch of miking and cables and all this equipment. We were running cables basically all over my entire cottage so that we had amps, 3 or 4 of them, set up in my parents' room with mattresses and dividers and microphones like strewn all over the room. And
like
it was
room mics set up in the tile bathroom.
Yeah, it was constant noise for like 9 days straight. Our ears were shot. It was crazy.
Yeah, like in hindsight, we should have given ourselves a strict like kind of work timeline, be like 9 to 5, like we're tracking. Because I remember one evening, like I couldn't tell what was in tune anymore, and I was looking at my tuner, it said it was in tune, and I was just having like a freak out. But we got through, I think, 8 of the 12 or 8 or 9 of the 12 songs.
I think it might have been 9 because we didn't have to worry too much about one.
We literally, when we packed up, we took, because I had the same equipment I was going to bring home, like microphones, we took such detailed pictures of the exact mic placement to the millimeter with like a nice camera and everything, so I can reenact the same thing at home. It might not have the same like room sound, but I had this kind of makeshift soundproof kind of box at home that was kind of built around like a desk and like mattresses and like futon mattresses that kind of folded over and made a little house over like a 212 cab. And a lot of people are like, what the hell is this bed doing in the corner? I'm like, it's not a bed. It's actually a please don't sit on it.
Yeah, please don't touch.
It was, yeah, so like I kind of got close to the tone we had there. Because one thing I wanted to do was like, yeah, we tried to experiment with tones and stuff, but I want to kind of really have a cohesive sound and like not have a drastic like guitar tone change when it comes to like track 3 and 4, like in between those two or something. But funny little Easter egg, the cab that we were tracking with blew up during the tracking of Progress Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to listen with a detailed ear, I can't tell you what side, but like the guitar tone will change on one side because we had to switch cabs, and like it went from using my lovely Emperor that blew up to using like a 212 that had V30, so it still had a very good sound, but wasn't quite the same. But yeah, so we tracked the guitars, and then right away, I took like about 2.5 weeks off work. So the whole time we were tracking guitars, Mike was still learning the few songs left on drums, including part 3, that we hadn't fully jammed yet, or like in the fruition that we kind of like made up going to the studio. So I gave him like the keys to like my jam space, and like he would be in there just learning the songs. like, kudos to Mike. Like, he was working at the time virtually 2 full-time jobs because he's just started a job and he was still leaving the other one while
He was
learning the album,
nuts.
and like came into the studio like ready to go. Like, he really like poured like every bit of himself into this record. And I think we booked about a week to track drums, and he laid it out in like 4 days.
Yeah, we
So we had
drove
like 3
everybody
days of
up
just,
to
like, Mario Kart.
yeah. We drove you guys up to
So yeah, our friend studio in Belleville,
Trenton.
just east of Toronto here. So we tracked that back to back, and then the game plan was to keep on going. But then we booked off time from like work and everything, and then there was like slight miscommunication on like how we were gonna get the drum tracks back, and just everyone kind of getting caught up in their own things. And then like we eventually got those back, and we're like, okay, let's finish this thing. Kind of like really hit the ground running, and then kind of like stalled a bit, and me kind of trying to get the guitar set up and like finishing the rest of the songs at home. And then
I ruined everything.
Still during that time, you were writing like some of the vocals. We had the music ready, and we're just like, just like get the vocals done when you can and stuff. And then you went to.
Then I ruined everything because, like I said, a lot of the album is dealing with me going through a lot of crap, whether it was relationship stuff or career-related stuff. And I was going through a mega rut towards the summertime as we were finishing up album stuff. I had basically finished writing the second last song because part 3 wasn't quite finished yet. And I got fired, I got dumped, and a friend of mine offered me a job in China to go teach. And I kind of saw this as like, oh God, the album needs to get finished. I don't want to ruin this, but I really need to take this leap of faith for my career and for my own mental health. If the guys still like me after this, then it was meant to be. If they don't, then my bad. And I quickly
spare the details. Like, it got ugly, but
yeah, it got real bad. But I made a deal with the guy out in Trenton.
Didn't talk to each other for a little while. Then we talked it out, and we're friends again. Yeah,
we're cool now. But I made a quick deal with the guy out in Trenton, our buddy Todd. Love him to death. And I shipped myself out to Borland Studios within a week, recorded the whole album, finished up part 3 while I was there, screaming my lungs out for like a week and a bit, because then I added a bit of extra time after getting sick midway through it. And then I was shipped out to China within a week after finishing that. And then I got to watch Nick and Chris do bass recording live streams for the next couple of weeks.
So we kind of went in a weird order. We did guitar, drums, vocals, bass. So it makes sense out of that.
But it was wild.
Thankfully, Todd exists and is in the picture and all this, because it wouldn't have happened without him. Because when Mikey dropped the option of going to China, it just blew up all of our worlds, and we're just like, well, the album's not done yet. What's gonna happen? Blah blah. And I was so upset that the initial plan was to track the vocals with me. I'd bought a preamp and everything for the mic and stuff, and it wouldn't have happened well. It wouldn't have been a nice scenario. I didn't want to imagine what it would have been like. We might have not even existed now if we tried to track vocals together.
That would have been messy.
So thankfully, you just kind of took a leap of faith and called up Todd and said, "You have any time?" And kind of surprised us. And then we knew when we tracked vocal demos before that we never tried to get the final take, because it's cool, we got the idea. This is just for our ears only. We know in our heads what the final idea is going to be even though the performance isn't 100% right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this and that. We can see the final product, and then the fact that I know getting those final takes and everything would be really tough, and that Todd, being a vocalist as well, was able to help Mikey, I imagine, kind of pull that out of him. And then we got what we got, and we heard stems one at a time. We're holy shit. So it was as if getting the stems from Todd was our album leaking to ourselves, being okay, here's these couple tracks, like, holy crap, and then like a week of silence, and like, oh, here's two more, and like, oh my god, because he was kind of comping and like editing the tracks while doing other clients and stuff, so like we had to kind of patiently wait to get all the songs. It was just like, holy crap, like this song's amazing, oh my god, he did this and that. And I think the last song we got was part 3, because of course I had to keep the fucking suspense up, and it's like a daunting 10-minute track, like of vocals. So he left that for last, obviously. And then like we got that, and initially I was like, "Is that it?" And then like the song, like I played it more and more because it was such a like long song that like there's so much expectations for it. But then I was like, "No, this makes sense." And then like reading the lyrics more and more, and just like how they were structured, it's like it became like one of all of our favorites, like really, really quickly, because like.
That was the one song that I hadn't touched with anybody. I kind of did it on my own.
It was like totally blind for us. Like it was the first time hearing it, so it's like we in our minds initially we wanted to be like cool, and then like hear it and then offer up things to like change or like this and that. But we're like, no, this isn't a demo. Like this is it. Like him and Todd, we have to put our trust into them. And like in hindsight, like I still wouldn't change anything about it. Like I love the song thoroughly. So I'm glad it worked out that way. And then after that was a whole bunch of, well, him not being in the country, we were playing instrumentally live to kind of keep ourselves like relevant in the scene here locally in Toronto and like surrounding cities. And some people knew what was going on, and we didn't like publicly like make a post and being like, oh, he's gone in China and like blah blah, because who cares to hear that, and we don't want to like stir up any like public like dramas. And in the meantime, it kind of gave us more time to really hone, at least for me, like my mixing skills. So even now, when I listen to the initial mixes I had when I got the vocal stems that I tried to send to the guys, being like, cool, like here's like a pretty good like idea of the song. I listen to those now, and like I am so happy we took our time to like really get the songs to where they should be and like do them justice. Because if we put it out 2 years ago, right now we'd be doing like a remix and re-release for sure. And just be one of those like redundant re-releases or stuff that would just kind of keep ourselves happy. Because throughout the process I was just really studying a lot of other mixes. A lot of my favorite producers were releasing like stem packs of a lot of my favorite bands conveniently, so I was able to like literally study and like look at like EQ graphs and everything of like what's in their guitars, what's in their drum tracks, what level is this whole mix sitting at, and trying not to get that instant gratification of like a super loud mix and everything. And like we mix it pretty quiet when it actually comes down to it, like leaving a lot of headroom for the mastering. And then when it came to like doing all the mix downs, it was just a constant process of me sending it to the guys and them all giving like a full sheet back of like, you know, Mike, you would be mostly concerned with vocals naturally, and being like, cool, maybe try a different reverb here, this effect here, I sound a little nasally here, watch a de-esser. And then Chris would really have like the nitpicking, like especially for drums, he had a lot of good catches of like, oh, the cymbals are a little piercing here, bring this down. You know, like I didn't know you were doing that on guitar, that sounds cool, but then like it kind of buries this, or all in all. And then, you know, a lot of them had the same feedback, so like when it got to like all three of them, kind of like whoever was last to respond was like, yeah, what they said and this. So there was a lot of that, which was really healthy. And then like when it got to mastering, a good friend of mine, Mike Stringer, he used to play in a band called I Wrestled a Bear once, but he's from Vancouver, across the country here in Canada. And he always had a band called Fallen Archaea for a little while, and that's where he made friends, like back when we were both like 18, 19. He played a show here at Sneaky D's. So we always kind of like, he was always doing music much more actively, and I was always trying to get a project to like try to like play shows with him and stuff. And then I don't regret anything, like we took our time to get where we are, but he was always very active in like all these different projects. And then when it came to the last couple of Fallen Archaea releases and his new project now, Spirit Box, I'm like, yo, who's mixing and mastering this? And it was Daniel Bronstein out in LA, who used to be a member of Volumes. And other than like Spirit Box and Fallen Archaea, he mastered the last The Veil of Maya album. and I was like, fuck, like all those albums sound really good. And we had other people in mind that we wanted to like master, but then when we found projects that were just mastered by them, they didn't quite have what we liked about their other records. Maybe it was those people's mixes as is. And so we got in touch with him. I sent him a couple songs that were like mix ready, because I wasn't just going to get a blind reference from him. It'd be like, oh, cool, here's my buddy. Like, I'll put my name for it on this reference, and like, what if it sucked, you know? And so we finally got a hold of him. And then when he did Progress Avenue initially, he sent us a test master, and then his feedback was like literally like, turn down the kick drum 1 dB, watch the 250 hertz on the snare, and I'm like,
he was awesome.
Yo, I was boosting 249. Like, this guy, like, his ears are just magical. And he's like, try this on the bass. I usually like to have a little more like low mids, and made all these like fine-tuning adjustments. I was a little self-conscious, and I was expecting him to be like, bro, just send me the stems, I'll mix this for you. Or like, you got a lot of work to do, my man, come back in a month or something. Like, I was expecting something like that, because we're so invested, and like, we're honestly like a little too self-conscious for a good sometimes about some things. And like, we're just like, yeah, like, and then he gave that back, and then we heard a test master, and we were just like, holy shit. Having been like invested in this project for like 3 years, like in the making of, it was like hearing the songs for the first time mastered, and it was like seriously surreal. And then that's what you guys hear now, and like, we couldn't be happier with the fucking result. Like, like, to be frank, like, for all of us, like, it is a dream of ours to like make a record, like of something we pour everything into, and just have like a tangible like product that hopefully
this is our baby.
Else. It's our baby that like hopefully other people will discover, much like we discovered some of our own like independent underground bands that like we fell in love with. Like, we got some messages of people like really positive like feedback about the album. Like, their stories kind of bring me back to when I found like a band like Moving Mountains, for example. I remember vividly the first moment I heard their songs and how floored I felt and like moved. And that's what like these people sending us a message about our stuff. And I'm like, that was primarily our goal, of like just really inspiring, and like just wanting to kind of through music just really
resonate.
help people and resonate. And yeah.
The music, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, but one of the two of the major threads are obviously, you know, sort of hardcore music, as well as post-rock. Like, those two don't necessarily run in the exact same circles. What sort of interests you in those two aspects of, you know, the musical spectrum?
It's funny, a lot of that is stuff that the four of us realized when we got together. Nick and I specifically bonded over a lot of stuff like This Will Destroy You, Being as an Ocean. I'm trying to think of some other big ones, but like a lot of the bands that we bonded over tended to do the stuff that we were trying to capture here, like marrying those two as best as we can. Our tastes are so diverse in the band as well. Chris and Nick and Mike, all working in record stores, have been exposed to so much.
Oh, yeah.
And their tastes are everywhere. Nick's constantly hunting through Russian Reddit looking for things creeping around on the internet that might kind of inspire him. And a lot of that strange marriage of sounds comes from our strange marriage of tastes. It's really fun to work together, because it's like, oh guys, did you hear this new song from this intense, crazy, like thrashy band? Oh yeah, that's awesome. By the way, here's this pop band that I'm really into today, and like it just works. And yeah, I don't know, Nick, where does a lot of this feed into your writing?
Like, the bulk of it and the concept is like, I filled in for metal bands before. I filled in for like straight up post-hardcore bands and etc. And it's fun playing that one genre, but in the back of my mind, I knew in the long run, as if like one band was to be something that would be my like full-time focus, it would have to have a broad interest for me. Like, it couldn't just be a metal band, because I would kind of maybe get bored of that for like a brief period or something. So I knew I wanted to have this project be very non-pigeonholed with like genres. Like, sure, something has to be like comprehensive in the sound. Like, there has to be a certain tag, and there's so many subgenres nowadays. But thankfully, like, those two mentioned are like progressive or like post-hardcore and this and that. Even within post-hardcore, you can have somebody like Memphis Mayfire or something that's very like poppy, and, well, at least in the recent releases, kind of like very structured and poppy. But then you can still have super messy experimental stuff that falls into that blanket, like a lot like Birds or something that really spans a lot of different genres, but they're both on the same umbrella. But you wouldn't necessarily call them the same band. But our music taste, like, I always joke around, like, anytime my iPod's in the car, I just call them DJ Shuffle, because it would go from like something super heavy like Admiral Angry or like Tony Danza to like the most ambient like Hammock or Helios, Godspeed kind of songs, and then you'd get like kind of more alt rock like Third Eye Blind or like Matthew Good playing, and then like some pop stuff or just really obscure stuff. And it just kind of, that's the beauty of music. There's so much cool stuff out there that, like, I can't stand personally when people say like, I love all music but I hate country.
Yeah.
It's like, well, shit, you're lying, because I know if I was to hum a country song to you, you start tapping your foot or something, or like, you know the words. There's just like one of my best friends and I, like, whenever we talk to like family and stuff about this, we just only see like good and bad music regardless of genre. Like, there's good classical music, and then there's subjectively bad. There's good metal, there's bad metal, like, but then that bad metal to somebody else is good. So that's why everything coexists. Like, nobody's gonna agree on everything, and that's fine. Let people create. Like, everyone's gonna find their own thing they like in music. And so, with that in mind, you know, I feel like I wouldn't alienate a post-rock fan that gets lured into our music for our ambient sections, and then still having all of our other elements, because we kind of just like dabble in a whole bunch of different genres. But I hope we do it tastefully.
Yeah, and I hope that it kind of acts as like a bridge for a lot of music fans too. I find that most of the albums I've fallen in love with have been the ones that have brought something new to my table, something that's like introduced me to something else. Like when I fell into Fall of Troy, that introduced me to so much. Like, it wasn't just a post-hardcore album. It was falling into that moniker of kind of like math and progressive technical metal. It was then albums after that just started progressed into things that felt a little bit more bluesy and rock and roll. And it's just cool to run into bands that will open your eyes to other things. The biggest thing that we tried to do with the album is try to do something that's mature, that will appeal to mature musicians, because it does so much. And for the coming of age musicians, I guess, the coming of age listeners, it gives them something to explore, something to actually sit there and digest, something to analyze. For some people, it'll be really pretentious and wanky and all over the place, but that's just subjective, right? Like Nick was saying, it's something that might not be for everybody, but hopefully it's something that everybody can at least respect for what it is.
And then, speaking on behalf of like the other members, I know Mike, on the surface, he's very passionate about his like metal and like groove metal stuff, but at the same time, he'll flip the coin and like go right onto like your folky acoustic pop kind of stuff, or synth pop kind of music, or anything. Like, we're all over the map. Same thing with Chris. Like, we all have, I think our foundational love is like kind of quirky music that's really challenging, like with time signatures or just kind of spazziness. Because I know me and Chris bonded over like a lot of like Fall of Troy or like Horse the Band, Number 12 Looks Like You, a lot of those kinds of bands. And then Mike would hear that and be like, "Yo, I love those guys too." And then like our drummer, he loves more of like metal, like Meshuggah and like the other kind of like more technical stuff. So we all have these different branches that challenge music in the same way that all kind of confide, and then we can still like the worst kind of situation to be in is having a member in the band that's like you have to like spoon feed influences to and be
Yeah.
like, cool, you're a great drummer or something, but like listen to these records and play like this guy, because that's when you kind of get forced or like get a really obvious like rip off or borrowing of styles. Instead, this way, like
It's been
you
really
know,
organic because we don't
it's
have
been
to do
organic,
that.
and it doesn't matter that like 3 of the 4 of us love one band, and then one guy's like, cool, I dig them, but like he doesn't have that nostalgic pull that we do from a certain project, but he'll take his time getting into it and vice versa. Like it's the kind of fun of it. It's not taking it too personal or too seriously of like, well, like how could you not like this? It's my favorite record ever. Like this isn't gonna work. But it's like, no, you found something that clicked in it. It's eventually gonna take time for them, or maybe it'll never happen. There's so many bands that like people love that, you know, it shocks a lot of people when I tell them like I'm not a big fan of Slipknot, but I love so much metal. I don't say Slipknot sucks because that's obviously not a fact, but nothing clicked about Slipknot with me, for example. And that, like, we can talk about that all day long. Sorry.
Yeah. Music is good. TL, too long didn't listen.
Nick, when did you start playing guitar, and why did you stick with it?
Around the age of 10. So it's been an embarrassing amount of 17 years now. I was hoping to be
Nice.
like, what, play like Tosin Abasi by now or something, but like I said, I always loved more melodic playing versus shredding, but I still always kind of have a quiet envy for shred. um, but funny enough, I wanted to play drums first and then bass, and then I settled with guitar. But then through means of discovering like MIDI and Guitar Pro that I can learn drums in my head, and then playing guitar, I eventually got a bass, and then was able to write both parts like on the real instruments and kind of play both. It was a lot of fun, but then I guess I really stuck to guitar. I guess I found my voice on and like confidence, and the fact that I learned I can convey the most proper emotion through that instrument. Vocals is something I've always wanted to do, but I've never had the balls to try.
We're working on that. We're working on that.
Some low key influence there. But, with like drums and stuff, like I'm still trying to play that. Like I'm much better now than I was back then, but I've always kind of loved those main instruments, and like I wish the music program in high school I had was a little better, because some of the initial ones kind of really patted you on the head, being like, wow, that's amazing, you can play something more complex than Mary Had a Little Lamb, so you get an A automatically. And I'm like, really? Like, and then when it came to like more high school, like keyboard class I took, our teacher was an absolute prick and like made it so unappealing for no reason, and kind of turned me off from that for a little while. And I kind of wish that wasn't the case, because like piano is like a really, really cool instrument that I wish I could play better. I think the track Repeat is like the extent of my piano skills, like on that song. But I wish I could actually play like some more cool stuff. Yeah, so it's been a little while, but moving forward, like I'm trying to always hone in on like focusing on the riff or like the song. But we do have an itch to try be like a little more technical or a little more somewhat shreddy here and there, just to kind of like, it's just fun. And like we pushed ourselves, like me and Mike, he played drums as long as I've been playing guitar, so since around the age of 10 or so we're like really on par, and like on the same like level playing field here, where like our skills are on par, so we can really push ourselves and be like, come on, we should like try something a little more interesting than that or something.
Mike, when did you start doing vocals?
It's been a long time actually. I got we have a local choir school here in Toronto, St. Mike's Choir School, And they make a really, yeah, yeah, lots of mics involved in our story. But St. Mike's, they're kind of known for performances at Massey Hall. They're known for having really big Christmas concerts and stuff like that. And it's an all boys kind of choir thing. They poached me when I was in grade 2 from my elementary school. So I was a part of a choir program for 2 years. It was a really cool experience because it's where I built up a lot of my kind of repertoire of, I guess, theory. A lot of my theory kind of came from those couple years. They forced me to learn piano too. And I also had kind of a dickhead Russian lady teacher who made me hate piano. So I also did not continue with it as long as I wanted to. But yeah, I've been singing since I think I was like 7 or 8 years old. And I was in a band in high school because a friend of mine heard about my history and was like, hey, you should go play music with this cute guy that I want to talk to. Be my excuse to talk to him. So that that led to me being in my other band, The World Awake, that's kind of sort of on hiatus right now. But I've been singing through that band for a long time. And I think it was only in this period of Even the Trees that I really have pushed myself and found my footing and become a much more comfortable and confident vocalist. I've always had decent range. I've always pushed myself to learn how to scream, but it wasn't really until this band that I really buckled down and I was like, okay, I need to, see some growth. I finally find my footing, finally feel like I'm happy with what's coming out of my throat. I need to be happy with my instrument.
But when did the screaming come into it?
Screaming stuff started. I'm trying to think. My band, The World Awake, kind of went through like 5 iterations. Our group was, you know what it's like when you're a teenager, right? You find your first band and you're suddenly, I'm a rocker now. And then a couple weeks later, another album drops and you're like, ooh, I'm a rap guy now. And I think we kind of went through these phases of like, that mimicked itself in our songwriting in that band. And I was an alt rock guy for a while where a lot of my influences were from Incubus and Red Hot Chili Peppers. And then we kind of went through a ska phase for a while, and we went through, I think the biggest pivotal change was when we got introduced to bands like Alexis on Fire and Protest the Hero, Canadian bands. So, joining that group of musicians now feels really cool. But bands like that incorporated the post-hardcore sound or that metal sound and had clean singing accompanied by screaming. And I was fascinated by that combination of textures, that like aggression with having the feeling and soft and warm vocals of a clean singer. And I always wanted to learn. And we played with a ton of bands at house shows and at local venues that had screamers. And I was like, I want to do that. And my mom was like, hell no, we paid for all these vocal lessons. You're going to ruin your voice. and it became like, I think that started maybe when I was like 16 or 17, that I was like, I finally was driving my car and I was able to scream in my car or at my friend's house away from my family so I could practice my screaming, or at a show and I was in a loud enough environment that I could just belt so loud that it was breaking my voice. And again, it wasn't until Even the Trees where I finally actually figured it out. I finally found where that careful balance between I'm making a cool sound and I'm going to really regret this tomorrow.
What have you guys been listening to, watching, reading recently?
Listening to what's been on my radar lately. I've been trying to catch up on new releases lately because I'm, like I mentioned earlier, I'm really passionate about collecting music, and I honestly, I'm a big fan of music in general, other than writing it and stuff. So I listen to a ton of stuff, but I love my weird Swedish metals, and I just found Stuart Near, I think it's pronounced. It's a member of Humanity's Last Breath, one of those guitarists, but it's with the whole Vilhjarta family of quirky metal, this instrumental metal release that's like so mind bending. The
So
new
heavy.
AFI EP is actually really good. I was really happy with that. Kind of more punky sound. To take a bit of a turn, the vocalist from Periphery has a new side project called Nick Mystery. That's so like 80s synth wave pop kind of thing, but it's so good. New Unearth was really, really like balls to the wall heavy. I dug that. Otherwise, I have a weird soft spot for a lot of like heavy deathcore and stuff. I love my obnoxious breakdowns and like 808 drops. There's this band called Crania I was recently shown that has a new EP. There's Within Destruction, and then another local band from Toronto, The Parallel, kind of doing that like tech metal kind of thing. They're really good. I got to see what those guys are about and like where they're from, and try to maybe like play some shows with them. That'd be sweet.
Mm-hmm.
As far as watching stuff, yeah, like I said, I'm all over the map with like new releases. Other than that, Hope's Fall. It's a band from I think North Carolina. One of my biggest influences. They were gone for like over a decade, and they finally came back. They were teasing new material for like the last 5 years, and it finally happened. And it's probably up there as like my album of the year, next to like Architects and stuff like that for obvious reasons. Then there's obviously that whole like swancore movement out in the West Coast with like Dance Gavin Dance, Hail the Sun, a lot like Birds, all that kind of stuff. TV shows and stuff. I love my horror movies. There hasn't been much horror movies lately worth mentioning, so I've kind of fallen off that. And not working at HMV anymore. I used to like really keep up with movies over there. But as far as like reading, it all falls back into music. There's Keith Buckley from Every Time I Die. I just was at their show this past weekend, and I got his new book. I think it's called Watch. He's really, really creative and weird with his writing. I remember his old book that he came out with a couple years ago. Like one page is like reality, and then the next page is like a fictional imagination of this character, and it bounces back and forth. But like sentences would carry on to the next page, so it's fucked. It's really hard to read because you have to mentally flick your brain to each personality. And then another thing that I'm looking forward to reading is the drummer from As Cities Burn has a couple books he just put out. Backstage, How I Almost Got Rich Playing Drums in a Christian Hardcore Band. So it's him really talking about being in As Cities Burn and the whole Solid State Records and Cornerstone Fest and all of the... He's really transparent in the excerpts I've read. And then he has a follow-up about their last two records before they broke up back in like 2010 or so. Yeah, it's really transparent and kind of cool to read with like the whole, quote unquote Christian metal and like Christian hardcore bands, and like how genuine is it? Question mark. Because Emery has their whole Bad Christian podcast that exposes a lot of things, but not necessarily like, to like rat people out, but just kind of be like, hey, like we say shit and fuck sometimes, and we drink some beers, but we also are kind of down with Jesus. Like that's kind of their whole thing, and like it's so shocking to be like, well, that's the whole metal influence, and that's why it's bad and evil. It's like, no, it's just a different outlet. But yeah, those are really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading those.
I'm all over the place, honestly. I haven't had much of a social life because, again, teaching and all that. But in terms of music, the stuff that's been keeping me sane lately, I was really into that new Andreas release. A lot of the like the Cali scene has been huge influences on me in the last while. The kind of poppy, punky math rock sort of avenue of music. So yeah, I was really into that recent Andreas release. I've been huge on bands like Good Game. Anything that Brock Besnell gets involved in is nuts, absolutely nuts. and he's one of the few musicians who inspired my Strandberg purchase. So I'm working on my guitar chops over the next while, I think. Who else have I been listening to? I got really into a bunch of K-pop recently. Got some Blackpink and Twice. But honestly, a lot of the music I've been listening to lately has been friends. There's been so many friends in the last while that I've met through social media, or who we've kind of met through playing shows together. A really sweet Filipino dude, Jason Crook from the States. He's in a band called In the Background, and he recently released a really nice folky, progressive, mathy, acoustic, emo sort of album. I got a friend, John, who's in a group called Aura of Birth. Heavy, awesome, so good. It's kind of in the same vein as a band that Nick and I bonded over called Substructures. And it's awesome. I'm so excited for him to release some music in the next while. So he's been really on my radar. And I guess another post-hardcore sort of groovy group of guys from Detroit called Sincerely. I've been pretty close with their guitarist Christian. I know that they recently lost a drummer, so they're sort of looking for some sort of replacement so they can get back out on the road and playing again. But so many cool friends out there doing a lot of really cool stuff. And as for other stuff, I don't know. I've been really into playing Super Smash Brothers since that came out. And I'm still trying to finish reading Portrait of Dorian Gray that I started like 3 months ago. I'm trying to finich House of Leaves that I started reading like 5 months ago. There's a lot going on.
10 years ago.
Yeah. I know I started rereading it in the summer. I started reading it like 3 years ago because it's a massive, stupid book and it's crazy. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff I got to do during these holidays.
There's two more quick ones, if you don't mind, that just came to mind. I found this one last night. This band, I think they just say Kanashi, Kaonashi. They're from Pennsylvania, I think. It's as if the Contortionists during Exoplanet era was a hardcore band with like Number 12 Looks Like You vocals with really transparent lyrics about the stresses of growing up. Like their single is called "What's Your 5-Year Plan?" and it's about like everyone fucking being on your case, like, why don't you just work in a kitchen? Why don't you become a banker? Why don't you become this and this and this and that? It's just really obvious, like, life stress kind of stuff. And the vocalist is so amazing in his delivery. Yeah, I found that last night, and it's, like, really, really cool, worth checking out. And then another band that's been really inspiring, that's a bit different, is Bad Rabbits from Boston.
So good.
They mend a perfect mix of fucking R&B and post-hardcore. Like, their live show is like watching At the Drive-In, as if Michael Jackson produced the songs with like all the 90s like R&B all-stars like in the same room or something. Like, it's such a cool fucking mix.
It's super bouncy. I love it.
Lastly, I mentioned with the mastering is Spirit Box, based out of Vancouver. The husband-wife duo, ex I Wrestle a Bear Once members. So it's still very technical and metal, but very melodic and a lot more focus on quality songwriting and like memorable hooks and stuff. And they're finally playing debut live shows. They just announced with Misery Signals in the spring, so which is really, really rad of them to see. I know they were like really waiting to like make their fucking first shows like a big impact, so yeah, happy for them.
That was Tonight We Don't Think We Do. Before that, we heard A Hole in the Ice Part 2, and the first song during the interview was Progress Avenue, all by Even the Trees from their debut album, If Only Every Day Could Be Like This. Thanks so much to the guys for chatting to me. It's always a little bit difficult to organise stuff with people who are across the other side of the world, but we made it work, and that's some of the most rewarding. Obviously, this podcast is kind of focused on Australian music. Yeah, some of the most rewarding conversations is getting chat with up-and-coming bands from overseas as well. You can send me an email at australianhunger@gmail.com. Send me your thoughts, your comments, questions. If you're in a band and you are interested in an interview, send me an email and we'll see what we can do. And you can also hit me up on social media, OzHunger on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And of course, if you like this podcast, rate it on iTunes and all that jazz. But thank you so much for joining me. It's going to be a pretty wild ride over the next couple of weeks. I did 5 interviews this week, which is partly why this interview is released a little bit later than I'd hoped, but hopefully we'll be able to get these episodes out nice and quick over January. See ya!